So you're going to do research papers on research for this course. And that's exactly what you're going to do, is that you're going to pick some group of living things, and how big or small the group is has a lot to do with what you can find. Is that there's some very large groups of living things that you can't find a lot of research to talk about. And then there's some very tiny groups of living things that there's huge amounts of research to talk about. So you're going to let me know ahead of time what you've chosen, and I'll feed back to you whether I think you've made a good choice, whether I think you're going to find enough to fill 4, double-spaced pages from beginning to end on how research gets done on this particular group of living things. We're going to look at all different living things in this course, so any group, as long as they're alive, is allowable. Hell, I might even allow you to do viruses, which are iffy living things. Chapter 1. So, as it says here on the web page, and as I'll have papers for you, and it'll be up on Blackboard. For double-spaced, reasonably margined pages of text, which means that if you get 3 pages and you tell the computer to make 4 pages, it's not going to be reasonably margined or double-spaced properly. And you'll wind up with a deduction that's the same deduction you would have gotten for being short. I don't care if you go over 4 pages, but if you're short of 4 pages, that's the requirement. You're supposed to hit 4 pages. And as I said, I want you to dig a little bit. I want you to be able to tell me not just what they find out, but how. I tell you, as a science person, I watch nature shows and they'll make some statement and I'll go, how did they figure that out? And the answer very often is they just guessed. Is that it just looked a certain way and it made sense to them. And so it wound up in the general publications and people just go, oh, that's how it works. And you look and go, well, do you really know that? And you go, no, there wasn't really any way to test it. That's the thing about science. How do they test, what sort of techniques do they use? The idea here is to find several studies to discuss. Is that if you find one study, you're not going to be able to fill 4 pages out without basically copying your source, and that's not what I want you to do. I want you to describe how studies get done. The more studies you can find, the easier it is to fill 4 pages with it. So that's why your choice of living group is a very important choice. You want to be able to find something where there's 8, 10, 12 different studies that you can talk about, where you can very briefly tell me how they did their research. I don't really care what they found out. You can tell me, but I'm more interested in you telling and showing me you understand how the processes work. So if you're going to throw jargon at me, I'm expecting you to explain the jargon like I don't know what you're talking about. And that's a very important thing on these papers. You need at least 4 proper references. They're listed at the end of the paper with the format that's described in these documents here. And as I mentioned before, is that the references on my book follow the format that I use. That's a basic science format that I'm going to expect you to use. Dictionaries, if you use a dictionary to find a word, you got to put it in the list of references, but it doesn't really count because not enough there. Same thing true with encyclopedias, unless they are technical encyclopedias. General usage encyclopedias are written for high schoolers. It's not appropriate for a college course. And you're not going to find what you need to find in an encyclopedia anyway. Proposals. Right now, I don't know offhand what the date is on these. It's on your stuff, but I'm going to expect you to give me a proposal. That's December. Let's see what we got for September. A proposal will tell me what group you picked, what sort of research you're going to look at. And that can be, again, really focused or really broad. Like say, I want to do mice. You better pick a pretty narrow field of research, because there's thousands and thousands of ways to study mice. Whereas if you go, I want to study how to do hyenas, then you basically, you go, I'm going to try to find anything they've done to study hyenas. I don't know that you're going to even find enough to fill 4 pages on hyenas. That's why we need the proposal, so we get this back and forth. We'll all go, well, I'm interested in what you find out about hyenas, but I'm not sure you're going to find enough, which is my way of saying start early, because you may need to switch to some other thing. And then, just to get you started, find a couple of references already. See, what you can find. You don't have to list them as technically as you do on the paper itself, but you do need to give me something that's obviously a reference. Like you go, I'm going to Google, that's not a reference. I'm going, going to use library sources, that's not a reference. If you go, I've got this web page from the San Diego Zoo where they talk about hyena research. Okay, you don't need to give me the address, but I found this article from a 5-year-old Discover magazine about hyena research. Okay, but it should tell me that you've got something specific you've already found, as I'm trying to get you looking early. That's really the basic purpose for that. Proofreading, you got to get a proofread. If you're bad at spelling, you can't always trust spell check, but you need to get a proofread. If you're bad at grammar, I'm going to notice. I will proofread it for you, but you have to do it early enough to give it to me so that I can proofread it. Preferably have you come in and I'll proofread it with you sitting, I guess, 6 feet away from me, but it's much easier for you to understand my proofreading if you see me do it and I go, okay, here's the problem here, here's the problem here. And I will do that as many times before it's due as you want me to. People go, do you offer extra credit? Yeah. Make sure it's right before you give it to me. Is that run it by me, however many times it needs to be run by me, and you'll get a better mark on it. So, the library is offering tutoring and writing lab. I don't know exactly how they handle it, but they don't know what I want. So they can help you with spelling and grammar, but they can't necessarily give you, good advice on, okay, this is a nice paper. Is that they read this paper all about what people have found out about hyenas. And I look at the paper and go, well, how did they find that out? That's what you were supposed to do. They didn't know that. Anyway, I will, look at it as many times as you want me to. If you're having problems putting it together, you're having problems tracking stuff down, I have had people actually correspond with folks doing research. One of my students actually went and spent a couple of weeks during the summer with one of the guys he corresponded with and wound up transferring to that university to work with that professor. He was doing wolf research. But sometimes you get bogged down and that can make things take longer. But if you keep me in the loop, you go, well, I'm trying to do this. I actually am trying to contact the guy, and I've emailed him a couple of times, but I haven't really got what I need yet. And we're getting closer and closer to the deadline, and then you come to me at the deadline and go, I haven't really been able to pull it all together. I know you've been working on it. You've been telling me as you went along. So I'm way more likely to go, okay, take an extra week than it's the deadline, and you've never talked to me about it at all, and now here you are with 12,000 excuses. And I'll go, well, it's losing 5% a day for every day that it's late. So keep me in the, when you go to write it, you can put a title page on it, you can put pictures on it, I don't really care. Give yourself some room if you start writing on the first page, but I'm gonna look at where you start writing and where you stop writing and count 4 pages, I hope, in order for you to have 4 pages. And however fancy you make the beginning is kind of up to you. But minimum 4 pages of text. If you do footnotes, we call science footnotes, but they're technically not. They're technically embedded notes. So you don't do the little number with the thing at the bottom of the page. You do not do that. Is that if you tell me anything specific enough that a reader should go, they got that from somewhere. But the two things that are really important that I definitely will mark off for are direct quotes and numbers. Because a direct quote had to have been copied from somewhere and numbers had to have been copied from somewhere. Specific descriptions probably should be footnoted as well, but I don't make deductions for that. I just put little notes like, that should have been footnoted. And I do call them footnotes even though they're embedded notes. Where you would put the little number writing an English paper, you put in parentheses the last name of the lead author on your references. Your references are an alphabetized list by lead author or organization, if it's an organization, like websites sometimes are. But that tells me where this came from. And I'll look at your reference list and go, oh, okay. Now I know where they got it from. It doesn't even have to tell me what page of that reference it came from. But that's how it works. So I'll be reading and reading and reading, and it'll say, Litterdoll, and I'll go, look at your reference page, here's Litterdoll, oh, that's what that's from. It's a pretty straightforward system. Journals often don't stop things at the bottom of the page if you started to do numbers to the bottom. It's a whole thing. But that's how you do footnotes for me. For the reference page, as I said, it follows the same reference that my book follows. If you look at the references, you're trying to figure out what you got. But there is no set, solid science reference format, but virtually all of them boil down to who did it, how old is it. We're not so anal, we want to know the month, but we want to know the year. Because research from 2014, I'm gonna think is more trustworthy than from 1994. And then what was your source, what was the name of the article that it came from, or the web page if it came from a web page. And then where did you find that? What was the article in, if it was in a publication? What website was your web page part of? Then it gets more specific. A lot of times, even even the website is part of something bigger. But the website name of the sporting organization, the full internet address of the source that you used, and if you're using an internet source, I want to know the date you looked at it, because I don't care about the dates you looked at paper sources, because they're not going to change, but internet sources do sometimes change. So if it's paper, author, year, title, source, volume and issue numbers, or date if it's a newspaper, or publisher if it's a book, page numbers if you use something that had page numbers. Internet, most of the time there's not a human author on an internet web page, as the author winds up being the support organization, but sometimes there's an author. But most of the time you're going to be putting an organization here rather than an author. Again, the year, you usually can find the year down at the bottom of a web page or the central website. The title of the page that you were looking at, the website that it was part of, and the internet address. If you get a paper source from one of the library's databases, tell me what database it was. Because sometimes I want to backtrack some information, and I need to know where to find it. So web page, you give me the address, I can find it. If you took something from the database, if I do a general search through the databases, that doesn't work terribly well. I want to know what database I'm hunting through. And I will sometimes backtrack your information, because the thing about a footnote is you get to blame somebody. If I'm reading your stuff and I go, wow, that's really, really wrong, but you put a footnote on it, I'm going to go look. And either you interpreted what they said wrong, or they got it wrong in the first place. If it's the first one, that's your fault. The second one, it's not your fault. So it's a great thing about a footnote. You get to blame people. And then there's a list of things that people commonly do wrong. A whole bunch of things. And spelling and grammar, normal errors. This is my sheet that I use when I'm correcting, so that I try to be relatively consistent correcting stuff. And that is all of the stuff for the class. So that's your introductory stuff. That's what we would have done the first day, the first lecture.